Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for being here. It is Miss Gooding, and I'm here to talk about your favorite topic and subject, history, of course. Today's topic is the Scopes trial that took place during the Roaring Twenties. Specifically, it took place in July of 1925. This was a case that lasted about a week, and the specific topic of this case was whether or not evolution should be taught in public schools in Tennessee. Earlier in 1925, a law was passed called the Butler Act that denied teachers and made it illegal for them to teach evolution. And here's an excerpt from the Butler Act. Quote, "It shall be unlawful for any teacher to teach any theory that denies the story of the divine creation of man as taught in the Bible, and to teach instead that man has descended from lower order of animals." Unquote. So you can see that this law denied teachers from teaching evolution and only allowed them to teach creationism and to support the Bible. I'm going to move ahead to this and I'll go back to the defense attorney or the attorneys in just a second. But so when the ACLU got wind of the Butler Act being passed, they were not happy. And so they wanted to make a point. And what better way to make a point than actually to have a court case that would probably become a media circus. And so they found a young man who was a teacher of science in the small town of Dayton, Tennessee. And he was really young. He was fairly popular with his teachers. I think he didn't have a family yet, and so the family wouldn't be drugged through, a major court case. But this was an intentional protest against the Butler Act. And so they found this young man, John Scopes, and he did admit that he taught from a book called A Civic Biology. It was written by George Hunter, and it was the official biology text in Tennessee, and it did address evolution. So the ACLU got him set up with a defense attorney, and the state was willing to, bring him to court and all that. So Clarence Darrow became his defense attorney. Clarence Darrow was an amazing attorney, was very well known. He could pick and choose his cases, and he usually chose the most high-profile cases, of course. And he defended John Scopes. The prosecuting attorney was William Jennings Bryan. And William Jennings Bryan is the same man who ran for president. But William Jennings Bryan was a traditionalist, and he was a Christian, and he was a fundamentalist and supported traditionalism. But you guys, this became a media circus, and I'll get to that in just a second, but I'm going to go back to this slide. So here are pictures of these two attorneys, very well-known individuals. This is Clarence Darrow. He's the defense attorney. He represented science, more so. And then this is William Jennings Bryan on the left-hand side. He's the prosecuting attorney trying to prove that John Scope broke the law by teaching evolution, and he represented traditionalism. Like I said earlier, this was a media circus, and so a lot of people flocked to this trial. Most of the people that came from Dayton, Tennessee, or surrounding areas were Christian, and they were there to support the prosecution. So they were there to support Bryan. There were also, however, lots of people that came to support Clarence Darrow and also to support science, including a lot of media specialists, including journalists and radio and all sorts of people. They came to report the news and took it from the angle of evolution should be taught. And so there were a lot of competing opinions and biases that were leaking out into the news really around the country. And here's kind of an interesting story. There was, I believe, a photographer that was up on top of either a stool or a ladder, in the courtroom, and he was trying to get the perfect angle, and he stumbled off of his stool or ladder. Well, the judge actually stopped the case, the court case, allowed the photographer to climb back up on his stool, and once he was there and could get the right angle, the judge started again. And so you can just see that this really was a court case designed to make a point. And the Christians were, the fundamentalists were hoping that, that it would showcase that evolution is wrong to teach, and we need to go back to our basic values. And on the other hand, The more progressives, the people that believed in science, were hoping to showcase the Butler Act as backward, and it was wrong not to introduce students to new ideas such as evolution. So it really became a battle of will between those two things, fundamentalism versus science. And this push and pull is not new to the 1920s. You have women, being liberated and getting the right to vote, but also that traditional woman that is fighting for prohibition. And then you also have the rise of beautiful communities in New York and Chicago of African Americans that are creating beautiful works of art and literature and music. But you also at the same time have the rise of the KKK. And so this push and pull was nothing new in the 1920s. And media was a huge part of it. Not all media responded positively, though, to science. And so I'm going to share with you Darrow's opening statement, Clarence Darrow, who was the defense attorney for John Scopes. And then also you can see over here the local reaction. But here is part of Darrow's opening statement. Quote, "Fires have been lighted in America to kindle religious bigotry and hate," Darrow said. "If today you can take a thing like evolution and make it a crime to teach it in the public schools, tomorrow you can make it a crime to teach it in the private schools. And after a while, Your Honor, it's man against man and creed against creed until we're marching backward to the time when bigots burned the men who dared to bring any intelligence and enlightenment and culture to the human mind." So a really strong opening statement like, hey, we're on a slippery slope here, right? Well, the local reaction was very, very strong. A Tennessee newspaper called the Memphis Central or Commercial Appeal printed this political cartoon portraying Clarence Darrow as the Antichrist. And so you have mixed reviews in media. You have more of the national news that is reporting a positive spin on science, and then the local reaction as more of a negative view on science and pro religion. Again, that push and pull. An interesting part of the case was actually when Clarence Darrow called William Jennings Bryan to the stand, and Darrow was a great cross-examiner. He called him to the stand, and he called him as an expert on the Bible. Bryan is an expert on the Bible. And so Darrow started to question Bryan relentlessly about whether really humans should take the Bible literally. And so Darrow's questioning included Jonah and the whale, and was Jonah really swallowed by a whale, and do you live in this whale's stomach for 3 days, yada, yada. And Bryan responded, it wasn't a whale, it's a big fish. But finally, Bryan was able to admit, or Clarence Darrow was able to get Bryan to admit that we shouldn't always take the Bible literally, simply because in Genesis it describes that God made the world in 7 days. But Bryan admitted that 7 days could actually represent different amounts of time. And so then Darrow had cornered him. And he said, oh, okay, so you don't really take the Bible literally, and da-da-da-da. So at that point, the press declared victory for Darrow and the defense. However, in Tennessee, it didn't pan out that way. The press thought one thing, but the law settled on the fact that John Scopes was actually found guilty. Nothing huge happened to John Scopes. They kind of protected him, to be honest, but he was fined $100. But the major significance of the Scopes trial was that there was a newfound awareness about the teaching of evolution and whether or not it should be done in other states. So that conversation started. And at this point in time in the 1920s, more and more students were going to public schools simply because school became compulsory and students were required to attend school. And so not only were you getting a small section of kids that were being exposed to these new ideas, but it was a majority of them were being exposed to new ideas. And these communities were very concerned about what ideas they were being introduced to. So a lot of states in the North decided to pursue science and the teaching of evolution, and also on the East Coast. But a lot of states in the South decided to stick with fundamentalism and with teaching creationism. And so what you saw over time were these textbooks started to slowly eke out any of the sections about evolution and Darwinianism and any of those other kind of scientific approaches about how humans evolved here on Earth. I hope you learned a lot. Thanks for being here, you guys.